Hey everyone, how's it going? It's Matt here. Today I'm doing this video to cover Dory's new competition rifle. We just received it a couple days ago and she was able to shoot her first match with it on Saturday. So we're very excited. I wanted to give you all the details and go through the entire build to give you all the specs. But before we jump into that, I wanted to discuss why we thought the timing is right for Dory to get her own custom open rifle now, as well as sort of our goals that we had in mind when we were building it. So as you know, if you follow the channel, last year in 2023, Dory was shooting production division in the PRS matches that we shoot. And this year she also started in the production division. But through the winter, we started shooting some NRL 22 matches, which was brand new to our area of Canada. Previously, our area in Ontario didn't have any NRL 22 matches to shoot, but we started doing those in the winter. And it turns out the price cap for PRS production division and NRL base class, which are essentially trying to get to the same thing, are different. So she was just under the price cap for the PRS production division, which is over the base class division in NRL 22, which isn't a big deal. That just means she was shooting in ladies category and not base class. But then she managed to qualify for NRL 22 Nationals in Wisconsin. And that match is actually this upcoming weekend. We're leaving in a few days for it, which is pretty exciting. So we realized she qualified for this match, this NRL 22 Nationals match, a couple months ago, and that's when we thought it was a good idea to bump up her rifle configuration into something a little bit fancier, a little bit nicer, into what you see in front of you now. Furthermore to that, she also has a personal goal to try and qualify for the 2025 IPRF World Championship for rimfire, and that for ladies division doesn't have production and open, it's just ladies open. So it made sense to sort of get an open rifle for her now so she can start training with it. And in PRS, she'll move to the open division anyway. But really the NRL 22 Nationals is what kind of triggered this whole thing a little bit more prematurely than we had originally intended, but we're not complaining about it. So what do we have here? Well, there were sort of two big parts that had to come together in order for us to get this rifle in time. The first was the custom barreled action, obviously, and the second half was the MDT chassis here. So we're going to start with the barreled action. This is another Desert Precision Gunworks custom barreled action, which was a no-brainer decision for myself. I have two of Kenny's builds, both on Voodoo actions. One is a Schillen barrel and the other one is a Douglas. They're both absolutely amazing rifles to shoot. They perform phenomenally. I'd be very impressed. So when we realized we wanted an open rifle for Dory, I went straight to Kenny and told him, we're thinking about getting an open rifle for Dory. Do you think you could make it happen before Wisconsin? And clearly he was able to do it just in the nick of time. What's kind of funny is the barreled action for this and the chassis, which again came from two different areas, MDT and Desert Precision Gunworks, arrived at her house within 48 hours of each other. And they were both cutting it pretty close because, as I mentioned, the NRL 22 Nationals is just in a couple of days. But anyway, that was really lucky timing. She was able to get preliminary dope with it on Friday evening after work. And then, as I mentioned, on Saturday, she shot a 10-stage CRPS match, which she did really well. I have a little video on that as she ended up second overall, which was pretty awesome to see. So let's go to the specs of this barreled action. As mentioned before, it's built by Kenny, which is awesome, but you'll notice it is on a CZ 457 action, which is a little interesting because when you think of custom rifles, custom rimfire rifles, you often think of Voodoos, Bergaras, the Rimexes, and the Curtis actions, all those fancy ones. The 457 often gets overlooked for a true custom build because there's so many pre-fit options and it's a fairly easy setup to work with at home. You know, you just have the two grub screws holding the barrel in. You can swap barrels really easily. This one's really special though because Kenny is now threading his barrels onto the 457 receiver. He's threading the receiver and the barrel tenon, so he mates them together similarly to his other builds that usually use threaded tenon. Previously, he was doing a thermal fit for the barrels to the 457 actions, but he's actually threading them now, which is an even more secure method of installing a barrel. So that was really cool. And then Dory herself decided she wanted to stick with the 457 just because she was so familiar with it. She's been running 457s for years now. She's familiar with the bolt throw, the trigger, the magazines, all that stuff. Going on to the barrel here, as I mentioned before, my two custom builds from Kenny were on a Schillen barrel and a Douglas barrel. This one here is actually quite interesting because he is now offering his own in-house barrels. I don't even think he's offering third-party barrels anymore. So this is sort of a new thing he just recently started offering. This is, again, an in-house Desert Precision Gunworks barrel, which is pretty special in a couple different ways. I asked him to give me some specs so I could share with you guys in this video some details, and I'll be totally honest with you, it gets pretty nerdy, so I'm only going to share what I think is most pertinent and even some of these things I don't quite understand. But first off, material wise, it is stainless 416. You hear often high-end stainless barrels being 416R, so it's in the same family. He does all the finishing himself, so he receives the material, he drills the bore, does the rifling, chambers it, and builds a rifle. I don't think he's offering blanks, but I won't speak for him about that. But again, I don't think he's actually offering blanks. He's just using his barrels for his own builds. And they are nitrogen purged air drilled, which I have no idea what that means, but then the ID is finished off with a wire EDM, which I know is quite accurate, so that all sounds great. And then the rifling in here is a proprietary rifling that Kenny has come up with himself. It's a 6-groove semi-ratchet rifling, which basically means if you look at the grooves, or one of the grooves, one side is a different angle than the other, so it's an asymmetric design, which is quite interesting. My Schillen barrel was a 4-groove ratchet rifling, so it's a similar idea, but it's a 6-groove version instead. And lastly, Kenny also did say from his testing, he was measuring BCs out at different distances with his barrels, and this semi-ratchet rifling is supposed to give you better ballistics performance out at ranges, but I have not done any of that testing, but it sounds pretty cool. I will say that this thing was very impressive when we printed it on paper that Friday evening. We just got a baseline for what it could do at 50 and 100, and then we shot it on paper again right before the match at 50, and this thing was printing really impressive groups. We were first fouling it with just some random lots of ammo I had left over, you know, partial boxes and stuff, and it was already clover leafing, you know, single hole groups and stuff, which was quite impressive. And then we switched to the lots of ammo Dory is planning to run going forward, so some long range match as well as some Lapua super long range, and that was printing really good groups. And at 100, even in the wind, it was doing anywhere from a 0.6 to a 0.8 vertical, which I thought was pretty impressive. Dory's behind the camera, and what do you think about the group so far?
It's perfect.
It's perfect. Okay. Anyway, so that's the barrel that is on this custom build. It's a 22-inch overall length, so from muzzle to the back of the chamber, it's 22 inches, and it's a 1.1-inch straight, no taper profile. So it's just a straight pipe, 1.1 inches all the way through, which is pretty comical because beside my Voodoos, it's actually thicker at the muzzle than my barrels, and Dory's the one running it. But pretty impressive. Again, because it's a threaded tenon to the 457 action, it can support this much heavier barrel than what you would usually be able to get away with the 2 grub screws, and it's just a really good option. You can see that Kenny also did Guncandy, the barreled action, which looks pretty sweet. I know on camera it probably just looks like a white or like a creamy white, but it's actually the Pegasus Guncandy. So in the sunlight, when the sun hits this, there's like pink and purple speckles and flakes through it, which looks really cool. It sort of shines and gives this like iridescent look. Kenny also was really kind and lasered some custom lasering for some personal touches. You can see here, there's the little Womfet logo with the little hair, the bow in the hair, which is quite cute. And then on this side, you have his maker's mark, Desert Precision Gunworks. And he also even deep engraved the Womfet logo onto the 457 action, which is really cool. I might not be able to see it too good, but it's like a deep engrave there, which is just a really nice touch, especially since that's on the 457 receiver itself. And then you won't be able to see it in this view, but he also laser engraved a Bible passage here up near the muzzle, which has a little special meaning because it's the passage from Dory and I's wedding ceremony. So just a little neat personal touch there that we really appreciate. The 457 action is your standard action. Some of these feel better out of the box than others. This one, you could definitely feel it needed to be broken in. So usually the culprit for that is this lasering under the bolt nose. They do a really aggressive laser that leaves a burr. So I went ahead and just polished off the burr and polished the underside of the bolt, and it's much better now. On Friday, you could, again, feel a little bit of grittiness, but now it's really nice and smooth, and I think it's gonna break in really well. You'll also notice that Kenny included a custom bolt knob that he machined himself, and again, really thoughtful of him because he said he designed this specifically for small hands, and Dory definitely has small hands. So what do you think of the bolt knob?
It fits my hands perfectly.
That's awesome. I agree. I really like the design. The little notches here give good grip, and all the bolt knobs that I currently run anyway are finger groove. So me personally, if Kenny offered this in like a 20 or 25% larger version, I would probably run them on my rifles as well because I really like the design on that. The scope base here is an Area 419 30 MOA scope base, which I have Area 409s on all my CZs anyway, so we already know that's good to go. And there's also, you won't be able to see it because it's under the chassis, but Kenny included an aluminum magwell from DIP products, which is quite nice. Definitely a bit of an upgrade from the plastic magwell that usually comes with the 457 Actions. The trigger is the stock factory trigger. We did consider going to a Timney, but we wanted to make sure that the rifle felt as familiar to Dory as possible. So she's been running the factory CZ triggers for quite a while, and I know how to tune them to how she likes. So I simply installed a YoDave trigger kit for the factory trigger here, and I have it set to just under a pound for pull weight, which is what Dory prefers. And again, I've had that all tuned up, but we might consider a Timney in the future, but for now it's actually quite a nice trigger and didn't cost us anything extra. All right, so let's go on to the chassis. This was the second half of the equation that needed to come together in order for us to have this full rifle build in time. This chassis is the new MDT ACC Premiere Gen 2, and if you go to the website right now, you'll notice you can't actually get it for 457 inlet currently. So we got obviously a very early production of it, and the way that came about was I knew I wanted to put Dory's custom rifle in a Gen 2 ACC Premiere when they had announced it back at SHOT Show. So I was already waiting for it to come out, but since we had already put in the order for the custom Desert Precision build, at the same time, I messaged my buddy Josh at MDT. We shot together at the IPREF World Championships last year on Team Canada. He works at MDT, so I shot him a message and said, hey Josh, like, is there any way I could get a Gen 2 in time for Wisconsin? And he had to look into it, pulled a few strings obviously, and I was able to get it in time, which is so awesome. So thank you very much to Josh. The reason why the 457 is taking a little bit longer to release is because they had to still fine tune the inlet design because it wasn't able to accept such a huge barrel. Again, this is a 1.1 inch barrel, and they weren't aware that people were now doing custom builds with such enormous barrels put on them. So there was interference with the barrel the way they had originally designed the inlet, so they had to sort of retweak it, and then Josh said it was ready. So that was really cool. There are a lot of improvements on the Gen 2 Premiere here over the previous ACC, and that's the reason why I definitely wanted one of these for Dory's custom rifle here. I actually have one of the original ACCs for the 457 here. If you follow the channel, you might remember this chassis. It's not being used currently, but I bought this way back in 2019, and comparing the two ACCs, there's definitely a lot of benefits to going with the new one. So first off, you can see the fore end on the old one was quite thin, and it had sort of like a tuning fork effect to it, which people really didn't like. So the new Gen 2 has been stiffened up just like the ACC Elite. It's actually the same thickness, and it has the same holes drilled and tapped on the top to accept the same control bridges. This Premiere version only can accept 2 control bridges, whereas the ACC Elite can hold 3, but the fore end is also slightly shorter on the Gen 2. It still retains the full M-LOK as well as the full arc rail on the bottom, but it is, again, as I mentioned, slightly shorter. Now, the big improvement, in my opinion, over the previous ACC for the 457 inlet specifically is this cut on the magwell you can see here. So this cut gives you very easy access to the magazine release, which on a 457 is forward of the magazine, or the magazine. Whereas the old one, you can see, did not have that cut in the magwell. What that meant was if you were running mags with extensions on them, you can see it gave you very little room to get your finger up in there, and some people couldn't even do it, so they could never run extensions with the old Premiere chassis. Now with the Gen 2, it is not a problem. Even if you have really big mitts, you can get your finger in there with this cutout and hit that magazine release, easy peasy, no problems. What's also really nice that MDT is doing now is for the Gen 2s, specifically for the 457 inlet, they're shipping them with their extended magazine latch as well as the extended spacer on the back. Those two things combined with the funnel that's inside this magwell basically aligns everything perfectly so that you just have to get these magazines in the magwell area, and if you push straight up, it funnels it right into the magwell inside, which is really awesome. So that whole section has been improved, especially with this cutout for the release, and I think it's a big win that MDT is paying close attention to what shooters are looking for. Everything else is more or less the same, but then you come to the buttstock and you can see it's been much more simplified. The old ACC had a bunch of thumb wheels and knobs and stuff going on. They totally did away with that, so they're using a spacer system for the length of pull. This came shipped with 4 spacers, but I removed them all because Dory's length of pull is quite short, and this is perfect for her with no spacers installed. And you can see there's 2 set screws here to adjust the cheek height, the cheek piece height. Very simple, keeps it nice and lightweight, which means it's easier to balance some of these smaller rifles with shorter barrels, aka a lot of rimfires would benefit for this, which is really cool. You'll also notice, if you have a keen eye, that this is the same profile as the ACC Elite buttstock, so it's compatible with the same dampeners or jellies. The only difference is it doesn't have the connection for the connector bar into the grip if you're going with this light version here. But I think it's a really good design by MDT to keep it lightweight and help balance the rifle a little bit better. Speaking of balance, this rifle is very nicely balanced, especially when you compare it to what Dory was used to running before. Her production rifle was terribly balanced. It was really rear heavy, and now that she has a lot of weight in the barrel, in a longer barrel, it balances it quite nicely. The balance point with no bipod on is right about at this M-lock notch here, so it's a little bit more further back than you'd want when you're on a bag, but it's 90% there, and we don't plan to add any weights because this is what Dory is comfortable running. I put this thing on the scale, it's 14.5 pounds or so. And considering that Dory isn't even 100 pounds herself, going any heavier is not going to be an option for her. So this is as good as it gets for Dory, but it's actually really quite nice. How did you find it on the barricades on Saturday?
So steady.
So steady. It was really good. You could tell she was more comfortable on the gun. She didn't have to struggle, controlling the gun while she's cycling the bolt, because it more or less steers itself onto target, which is awesome. Smaller grip here. I think they just call this the Premiere grip. You can fit an Elite grip on it if you want, of course, but this one fits Dory's hands much better. And lastly, I have to give a big shout out to MDT for the beautiful Cerakote job. Usually you can only get their chassis in, black or FDE, things like that. But since this was a brand new chassis that wasn't Cerakote yet, Josh asked us if we wanted a particular color. And funny enough, we had already planned to send this off to my usual Cerakote guy, in the future to get this Cerakote scheme done up. So we sent him the file, and he said he was able to do it in-house for Dory, which was really nice of them. This darker blue on the top of the chassis is the Northern Lights Cerakote, which is sort of like a dark bluish green, but in the sun it has like a green, turquoise, teal sort of specks to it. I guess that would be the best way to describe it. And then this lighter color on the bottom is robin's egg. And again, the scheme was sort of done up by Dory herself, and I think it looks pretty cool, and it was done in-house by MDT, which is pretty special. So that's really neat. Going on to some of the accessories Dory has on the chassis. The front here, we have her OBI quick link system. This is really nice to have, especially on heavier rifles. I have these quick links on all my competition rifles now. It lets you hook it up to your backpack strap, super easy to carry. This, of course, is the chicken wing from no sponsor. I got Dory to try this recently and she took a liking to it, so I pulled it off my center fire and we put it on her rifle. I have a bunch more in order because I'm going to throw these on all my precision rifles. This is definitely my control item of choice now. Again, the chicken wing for no sponsor. You'll notice I have the no sponsor cheek pieces on my MDT chassis, but Dory actually prefers the factory one, which is fine. So I kept that for her, but I peeled off the foam because I don't like the feeling of foam on my face, and I do plan to steal this rifle from her for some matches in the future. And then Optic setup, we have her Bushnell Match Pro ED. You'll notice from the match footage on Saturday, she was running my Razor Gen 3, and I told her she could keep it on her rifle if she wanted, but she actually likes the Match Pro ED for a couple of reasons. First off, a really important factor for her is the reticle design, and she likes the reticle in here, which I agree, it's actually a really nice intuitive reticle to read. And it's her favorite currently, so she's running that. And the turrets are a lot easier for her to turn. She was really struggling to turn the Gen 3 turrets. So these ones are a lot easier for her to turn. The parallax is nice and smooth, it's not as stiff. And the glass quality, honestly, in the Match Pro ED is really good considering its price point. It punches way above its class in terms of glass quality. And I'm very impressed with what you get for around $1,000 here in Canada. We'll see what she decides to do with her Optic in the future, but for now I think she's pretty happy sticking with the Match Pro ED, even though it's considered more of a base class or entry-level scope, but it's pretty awesome if I say so myself. The rings here, MDT Elite rings, nice and robust, solid ring options that we've been running for a while for Dory's rifles. And this little Velcro tab is for her dope card holder. And then lastly, you can see we have a send it level, an MDT send it level on a vertical mount with a fiber optics kit. I don't think I've ever shown this fiber optics kit before, but it's quite neat. If I turn it on here, you can see that the lights from the send it level travel through the fiber optics and they're attached to your ocular housing. So you don't have to break your focus from your sight image to check your level, which is quite neat. And Dory really liked that, so I got her one. This kit is from Brant Built Concepts. It's called their anti-cant ocular housing kit, something like that, but it's pretty neat. All right, so those were all the details of the new build here for Dory's custom rifle. She's really excited to start using this more, and this is what she's going to be running this weekend for the NRL 22 Nationals. Again, most people wouldn't run a brand new rifle just receiving it the week before, but I think she's gonna do just fine with it, and she's really excited to get using it. So if you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer them, but if not, I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care, cheers.